Hey guys, welcome to book review 110. Today I am going to be reviewing A River's Tale, 1 Year on the Mekong. Okay, by Edward A. Gargan. Basically, as the title describes, Edward Gargan goes from the source of the Mekong in Tibet down to the Delta region in Vietnam over the course of a year. Not always staying exactly on the river, but more or less along the course of the river, and exploring the people, the history, his personal observations, kind of his encounters that he runs into, and all that kind of stuff. Well, I guess there's really sort of, I'd probably say 5 main regions that he goes to. 1 being Tibet, 2 being the Yunnan region of China, 3 being Laos, with short forays into Thailand and Myanmar, though really it primarily focuses on Laos, 4 being Cambodia, and 5 being the Vietnam Delta in South Vietnam, or the Mekong Delta in South Vietnam. I guess the first thing overall that I noticed about this book is it is quite descriptive. If you are looking for a book that is easy to read, I would not particularly call this it. It's not necessarily that the subject matter is really obscure. Matter of fact, a lot of the things that he talks about are very relatable. Sort of the kind of day-to-day lives of people. Even if you're not from an impoverished country, you can kind of empathize with some of the impoverishment that he sees along the way. But he is very detailed descriptive. He describes how, the blossoms on the cherry trees. He describes the rust color of the river versus the deep blue color of like the upper river around Tibet versus, like not just the mountains, but specifically the tributaries that fall from the mountains and how their fall reminds him of yada yada yada, etc., etc., etc. Now that doesn't mean the book isn't very good, but you just have to have patience with it. And it is actually quite rewarding if you do have patience, because you really do get a full picture of what the area is like, what the people is like, what people's lives are like. Well, I guess the first area that he travels to is Tibet. Now, admittingly, I have read this book in 2 sections. I read one, the Tibet section, like about 1.5 years ago, and then recently read the rest of the book. But from what I can remember of the Tibet section, there was definitely sort of a conflict between the Tibetans and the traditional nomadic way of life, and kind of what China is, sorry for the noise you guys, but what China is trying to instill in Tibet, which is sort of the dressings of modernity without actually the democratic process, or really sort of the ability for people to recognize that they have the choice to live a nomadic, sort of more traditional lifestyle if they so choose. Now, often people don't choose that because you throw, Pokemon, or I don't know, that's just a random example. But you throw modernity in their face, they're going to eat it up. And that's really what China does, is during the Red Guard period, they really destroyed tons and tons of, and this is mentioned in the book too, they destroyed tons and tons of temples, of Buddhist monasteries, of places of learning, but really the sort of new tactic taken by China is one where they're not going to be as outlandish as the Red Guard during the Cultural Revolution, but they are going to try to change the minority peoples through cultural assimilation. That's really the word that I'm looking for. But he did observe sort of some traditional ways. He mentioned the yak herders that were just barely hanging on. He also mentioned sort of the sparseness of the area. He also didn't start at the source of the Mekong, because the source of the Mekong is in an area that's so elevated, that is at such high elevation, that people won't even, not even Tibetans will go there. So it really started the first civilization, or first, not civilization, but first settlement, first peopled area along the Mekong. At this point, the Mekong is very unpolluted. It runs very clear. What's going on, man?
I'm just going to leave these here to bring my car down.
Okay, cool.
You okay with that?
Yeah, that's fine.
If they're gone, I'll know who to blame, okay?
Okay. Sorry, guys. Well, anyway, up in Tibet, yeah, the yak herders, you know, they did their traditional tides. They had their traditional tents and the way that they kind of lived versus sort of the Chinese. Now, as we went further down the river, there was sort of a change from the traditional Tibet to a Tibet of mixed Tibet, but it wasn't mixed because of the forced way of the Chinese. It's just that kind of once you get into the Naxi people, the Dai people, the area that's really today the Yunnan area of Tibet, you really start getting kind of a mixture of lowland and highland peoples. Specifically, the Dai, or the Naxi people, no, it's the Dai people, actually renamed their city Shangri-La after the famous Kingdom Ward, Sir Alfred Kingdom Ward, I believe, who was a famous botanist in the area, and later had, no, that's a separate deal, had a book written called Lost Horizons, which is about, and was written by Alfred somebody. But it's a very famous book and kind of idealizes kind of this highland glutch or highland escape, or in, you know, the highlands of Tibet that were able to, okay, I'm gonna have to pause this. All right, sorry for that, you guys, I got interrupted. Anyway, I'm reviewing this book right here, 1 Year on the Mekong. Tibet was really the first region that he went to, kind of being culturally assimilated into China, which is, I think, the point that I ended on. Anyway, he went into the Yunnan, you know, saw the area called Shangri-La that was a renamed town, saw Lijiang, and sort of the one of the few towns in China that was being culturally preserved. Actually, there are a number now, but because really what happened is because Lijiang was so on the edges of importance during the Cultural Revolution, there was really no stock put in destroying its old town, so a lot of it was just preserved by happenstance. And then since then, it's kind of become a tourist attraction in what because it was preserved. And actually, a lot of Chinese like going there now too, I can tell you that. What else? Oh, he had mentioned that the Naxi and the Dai culture in that part of the Yunnan, not just around Lijiang, but around Dali as well, were really kind of being culturally assimilated in the same way sort of Tibet was, but much more in an urban sort of environment. So kind of the trappings of cultural assimilation in Tibet would be maybe like your car would overtake your yak, whereas really specifically mentioned the way of cultural assimilation in, I can't say that word now because I've said it too many times, in Yunnan was internet cafes, and all the kids wanted to know all the new pop music coming out of Hong Kong, playing on the computer, seeing in the internet cafes. Something interesting about China is very few people can afford internet connections or personal computers, but there's huge tracts of businesses of internet cafes where people can go and spend an inordinate amount of time doing what you would do with a personal computer, just in a, you know, kind of public setting. Internet cafes, largely in the West, being areas where you have like Wi-Fi, or even thought of as like coffee shops or areas like that. At this point, he's really dropped the majority, even in Yunnan, of what he's going to drop in terms of elevation over the course of his time there. So this is also the first area of the river that he can, I should mention before he goes into the area where he can take the boat, which is what I was going to mention. He sees some, you know, traditional Naxi singing. He also sees a traditional astrological burial. No, it's a Buddhist burial, but has astrological elements, as all Buddhism does. Yeah, and he sees that, and he's kind of a little bit disappointed because he feels that well, he's not disappointed in the Naxis because he feels that that's genuine and is something that's being culturally revived. But what he feels bad about the Buddhist ceremony is that it really felt like the funeral was just sort of checking off a checklist of things that need to be done when your parents die, and then that person will be forgotten, pretty much. So he had some reservations, but he also saw some areas of cultural reinvigorization within Yunnan. Also, one of the areas further up in Yunnan that's kind of along the Tibetan region, one of the monasteries, which I mentioned earlier, were destroyed all over Tibet, but one that he specifically went to was being rebuilt. Unfortunately, it was being rebuilt, it was a house and not a home, if you will, in the sense that a lot of these scriptures had been destroyed. All the monks had fled to India, and any of them that would have influence or anything anti-Chinese to say, or just any sort of dissidence whatsoever, would not be allowed to teach there, and essentially made it better than it was during the Cultural Revolution. They were still going to teach there. It was still going to be a house of Buddhism, but essentially a clawless house of Buddhism. But as I mentioned, at this point, once he gets to the southern Yunnan, he's done the majority of the drop in its elevation, at which point he is able to start taking boats. And kind of the spot that I thought was interesting throughout the rest of the book is that he really kind of does the taxi mode of taking a boat. I would think almost that would be more convenient to hire a speedboat, or as he often calls them throughout the book, a pierogi, which is an even smaller sort of boat that's sort of like a long needle-nose boat and then has an outboard motor at the back. Hire one of those and just hire them all the way from as high as he can get in the Yunnan region all the way down to the Mekong River. But he decided not to do that. He decided to do it kind of piece by piece, which I guess he gets a little bit better feel of what it's like to negotiate with the local people. So I mentioned that he sees a boatman who kind of tells him about running a boat in the true periphery of China. You know, you think of China, you think of the major rivers. You think of, obviously, the Yangtze or Yangtze. You think of the Yellow River. You think of the Pearl River, even in the Pearl River estuary around, you know, Hong Kong and what used to be known as Canton. But you don't really think of the Mekong. Now, the Mekong runs a long distance, but for most of it, it's innavigable and really provides no economic benefit outside of, as I mentioned, sort of a nomadic lifestyle, which the Chinese are obviously not into. So in short order, he crosses the border into Laos. This is kind of the third area of the book. And to start, he starts in the Golden Triangle region. Sees some hippie backpackers and ventures a short time with, and what I thought was kind of an interesting part of the book, the few hippie backpackers that aren't opium heads. Most of the backpackers that are more straight-laced, or at least, I mean, I'm not stereotyping backpackers, it's specifically, not even to Laos, but specifically to this area of Laos, to northern Laos. They're almost all come for the opium trade. There's really not a lot of tourism as there would be in other areas of Laos, or even in more concentration in Thailand. So he meets the few that aren't. He also mentions there's a lot of people that have like sweatpants with the drawstrings and Save the Earth shirts that really don't do anything throughout their day, and then once it gets about 5 o'clock, it's time to kick the hay and go smoke the opium. Which I guess is better than heroin, but seems like a pretty useless lifestyle. Again, look at my long hair. It's about as much in that lifestyle as, you know, I'm sure people think the same thing about me. After all, I am doing book reviews for YouTube. Anyway, it goes downriver, takes a super fast speedboat, hops over into Myanmar, sees the impoverishment there that is hard to believe, but is even greater than the impoverishment in Laos. Now he's only there very, very briefly and sees the very tiny corner of Myanmar, which is also one of the reasons why it's probably so impoverished, because he's not in Rangoon or Mandalay. He's in the very Shan ethnic corner of Myanmar. Goes over to Thailand, and in stark contrast to both Laos and Myanmar, sees the new 5-star, is it Ritz-Carlton or Shangri-La? Shangri-La not just being the name, but is actually the name associated with a hotel chain that I mean at this specific juncture, where he has a choice of like 30 beers, can sit in air conditioning to like 8th floor, overlooking the Mekong and the other river that kind of separate Laos, Myanmar, and Thailand. And it's really just in strong contrast to Laos. I'll say one more thing about Thailand that I thought was interesting. He noticed, and then I'll try to stay out of Thailand because he really doesn't mention it that much, but he noticed there are more, or he saw and backed up by statistics, that there are more pickup trucks per capita in Thailand than any other country on earth, which I just thought was an interesting statistic. Anyway, next he heads downriver, goes to Penang, but it's not Penang, it's P something. But anyway, at this juncture, he really goes into seeing the Buddhist phase. Luang Prabang. The Buddhist phase of his Laos trip. Now, this is still in northern Laos. Now, of all the countries that he visits outside of Myanmar, very briefly, Laos is the most backward. Cambodia is quite backward too, but Cambodia at least has a sense of vitality, at least around Phnom Penh, where largely because the communist group that took over Cambodia was overthrown, the Khmer Rouge, whereas the Pat Lao, the communist Lao that took over Laos, are still in power, and really sort of run a backward country. So that being said, it's very rural. I'll talk about that more in a second. It's very rural. He meets some students there. The only way for any sort of extended education in the country is through the Buddhist monasteries. The Pat Lao did not like the Buddhists, but just to realize to run a modicum of a successful society, they would need Buddhism there. He noticed the intensely devout nature of many of the Laos, who, even if it's rice, would cook rice, and the Laos monks would come out of their monastery every morning at like 6 a.m., walk around the city, and people would just put like rice into their bowls as they were passing around the city in their orange robes. I believe they're the orange robes of Laos. Once again, very, very detail oriented. There are really some things that I'm missing. I should section throughout here, but as I said again, the book is very detail oriented, so you can't cover everything. Next, he goes to Viet Minh, which is not in Vietnam, but it's actually the capital of Laos, and again, it's right across the border from Thailand, but again is impoverished. He mentions that. He mentions that the diplomat for the United States that established an embassy there within the last 10 years essentially has no idea how the government works. And if you're the diplomat stationed to the country, the capital of the country that you're supposed to go to, and there's just a giant black hole of how the government works, I'm not even sure how he would be able to do his job. But of course, that's on the Pat Lao, who are not democratic, who run a cabal of essentially paranoid decision-making and refuse to enter the 21st century. Now, they're maybe not as vindictive as the Khmer Rouge, who I'll talk about in a bit, are, in the sense that there are re-education camps, but they're not killing huge numbers of people. But what is the case is that there is clinging on to the last vestiges of power, despite the people, despite the living standards of the people, is the predominant mode of operation of the Pat Lao. They mentioned that the newspapers he went into a newspaper room that was like the national newspaper for Laos, or maybe just the city newspaper for Vietnamese, but more or less the same thing. You know, the main newspaper in the country. That was just silence. Like, normally you'd hear typewriters and a lot of hums of activity. And there were a few people kind of wandering around or working on short stories, but it just had none of the vitality that a newspaper organization should have. And this is the national newspaper for the country of Laos. He also mentions a very beautiful weaving group. I believe that is in the next chapter. As he goes down the Mekong, at this point in the south of the Mekong. Let's see. Yeah, I don't know exactly where it's at, but essentially this woman kind of helped, much as the way that the man in one specific man that survived the Cultural Revolution helped revive Naxi singing in the Yunnan. This one woman helped revive traditional weaving of Laos, and specifically of Laos women in this one area, and it's really quite amazing. He also notices, as he goes further south along the river, the French influence is greater. The French really not having too much of an influence north of Vietnamese during the colonial era, but in southern Laos it was much greater, though obviously not the extent to like a Vietnam. Some of the cities being Tha Ket, Savan Aket, and Paski. And some of the things that he notices is, although they're decaying and kind of decrepit and falling apart, the centers of town have, and these towns are small, you know, they are what they are in Laos, I guess, which is, I don't know exactly how big these cities are, but they're not economic hubs, if you will. All that actually takes place across the river in Thailand. But what he does notice is the decrepit kind of decaying French colonial buildings, kind of the sort of strangeness of these grand balconies and stairways in this area that is very much, you know, not falling apart, but yeah, pretty much falling apart, kind of decaying back into the jungle. Sorry guys, I gotta get work on this. Hey. Decaying back into the jungle. Yeah, so that's really cool. He sees a lot more Buddhist temples, and eventually he heads down to Cambodia, which I'll get to in a little bit. You guys, in Cambodia, he primarily talks about the Khmer Rouge, but also goes to Angkor Wat. And really kind of, I'd say the main focus in Cambodia is just the devastation by the Khmer Rouge. There's a place called, well, the English name for it is where people go in but they don't come out. That was a famous sort of classroom within Phnom Penh where people would go in and just get murdered. Well, actually, what they did at, that's not correct. What they did at the ex-school was to torture them, and it was horrendous torture, about as inhumane as it comes. And then these people were taken out to what has famously been described as the killing fields, where they were all killed. And of the, I think it's like 25,000 people that went through this one particular building, the only 6 that survived were the last 6, right when Vietnam was actually invading Cambodia. really during the course of this book, they actually found the guy that ran this camp, and I don't think that by the end the trial had happened, but it was kind of big breaking news in the city that all this had happened. There's also a memorial sort of in the middle of Phnom Penh that the author, Edward, went to visit. I believe his name is Nan, Nahn, I think. And he did all these famous kind of grotesquely expressionist paintings that were in this building, kind of highlighting the, not just like pictures, and there were pictures there too, but highlighting kind of the grotesqueness of the way that this was. Other than that, he went up to Angkor Wat, Angkor Wat being the center of the Khmer, not Khmer Rouge, but Khmer civilization in, I believe, the 12 and 1300s. And the thing that he found most interesting about Angkor Wat was really how it was a place removed. You know, many Cambodians don't have the financial means to visit there, and even in Cambodians that live in the area don't often visit Angkor Wat. And so what you have is really a team of, or a collection of tourists, of archaeologists, of kind of business people that will like run hotels or, you know, like small grocery stores or stuff like that. And then you have the Cambodians that kind of are the backbone or labor of the place, but they just kind of work there. They don't really live there. There's not really a vital life there. That being said, covering the history of Angkor Wat is pretty incredible and is often compared with the Egyptians as, well, really, the Egyptians, the Mayans, and the peoples of Angkor Wat for engaging the glory of forced labor. Now, obviously, a comparison can be made with that with the Khmer Rouge, and the Khmer Rouge actively promoted that ideal of forced labor. So maybe it's the fact that it's 900 years past, and we can't really see the suffering at Angkor Wat in the Khmer, but that was sort of the outcome that you can see is all these temples and all the intricately carved structures that are world famous. You know, it's one of the first UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Now, Angkor Wat is very close to Tonlap, the Tonlap Lake and Tonlap River. I believe I am pronouncing those correctly. If I'm not, I apologize. But really, kind of what I find hydraulically interesting about this is, you know, the Mekong is very much a seasonal, flooded, monsoonal river. And this lake, Tonlap, essentially the river that connects the lake to the Mekong, the Tonlap River, flows one way into the lake from the Mekong during the rainy season, and the lake just expands and expands and expands and expands. And then when it becomes the dry season, the river actually flows back the other way, back into the Mekong, and acts as sort of like a reservoir almost, and it's not man-made, which is really interesting. It's sort of a natural reservoir that the Mekong River has for doing that. Edward Gargan, after, he's kind of just one other interesting note. He kind of went out on a river in the northern part of the Mekong, well, not the northern part of the Mekong, but when the Mekong first floods from Laos into Cambodia. Yeah, here you go, that's perfect. In Stung Tring, and that's when I really feel that the author did the best job of covering kind of what life is like in Cambodia. Really, Phnom Penh has become very, even though there's a lot of kind of reminders of the Khmer Rouge, there's also been a lot of investment there. It's really a city that, if not as vital as, say, like a Hanoi or certainly a Bangkok, has some, dynamicism to it. In Angkor Wat and Siem Reap, I did say that right. The Tonle Sap River, or the Tonle Sap Lake, and then Tonle Sap River. Siem Reap, which is the city for Angkor Wat, which I mentioned earlier, really are kind of separated from, as I mentioned, the Cambodian Main Society. But Strung Tring, really kind of, you got a feel of what is, I won't say necessarily small town, but sort of midtown, average, run-of-the-mill like in Cambodia, and it's not good. There's a lot of paranoia. There's a lot of sort of rumor that the Khmer Rouge are re-emerging. But kind of one of the interesting things that they did see is he was actually able to see a Mekong River dolphin, which is one of the most endangered species on Earth. And considering how polluted Mekong can be, particularly from China, though really maybe not as badly as, sections of the Yangtze, more the industrial region are, but it is polluted. It's kind of, and also overfishing, and kind of, more brutally efficient fishing techniques. This dolphin has become endangered, and they were actually able to go see the dolphin, these dolphins, which I thought was really, really pretty awesome. Let's see, what else? I guess he just kind of, at this point, he's going completely along the river. He's not taking like trains or cars along it. He's actually riding in it. But the one area, the one area that he can't go is he can't go from the Cambodian border, even though he tries the Cambodian border to Vietnam, which he's a little bit angered about because he knows that both Cambodians and Vietnamese both go across the border frequently. I mean, that's not how it used to be when the two were at war, obviously, but in more recent times. Particularly the vital fishing areas, or the very abundant fishing areas of the Mekong Delta, and the very abundant fishing areas of the Tonle Sap, mean that fishermen will often go back and forth between the two, depending on where they think the better fishing is, or just time of year and stuff like that. But despite all that fact, he was not able to do it. So he eventually goes on. I want to get to the main area. Well, he eventually takes the roundabout way, goes back to Phnom Penh, and then flies from Phnom Penh to what is now known as Ho Chi Minh City, but what both internationally and even among the Vietnamese is really known as Hanoi. Now, if I can only find it. Yeah. It's known as Hanoi. Man, I screwed that up. It's known as Saigon. Hanoi is in the north. It's known as Saigon. And in this area, he kind of sees sort of in the way that southern China is very much just sort of the engine of society is manpower. Is draining the fields, is planting the rice, is when you go up and down the boats now. It has been replaced largely by motors, but for a long period of time, and there's still that mentality, you rode the boat. If you want to get the rice, you have to thrash the rice, and that's often done by hand. And just the idea that this whole sort of agrarian, sustenance agrarian area, to a large degree, is wrought by manpower. Now, almost immediately after leaving Cambodia, the Mekong River spreads out into the delta, Mekong Delta, which really takes up not all of South Vietnam, but a large section of it. Well, and it's not even 50%, but it's a very important central section of South Vietnam. So he goes to Mai Tao. He goes to, and one of the things obviously that he's covering here, being an American, is the Vietnamese War. Mai Tao being, I believe, where all the Huey helicopters were based and were distributed throughout the south of South Vietnam to fly their various missions to fight the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese. He also sees an old army base, which is rusting out and now just kind of fallen fallow to the point where it's really not interesting. He goes and sees during that time a much more interesting site, which is a poisonous snake farm just up the road. What else? He goes to the border town of Cheongdok and goes to the one mountain it's not really even a mountain, it's kind of an elevated hill that's in the whole Mekong Delta region, where he can kind of take in the sunset and overlook kind of the golden rice, almost sort of like an image similar to like the golden wheat of Kansas, but the golden rice on the Mekong. I should mention that he does this in the dry season. This trip takes place in the dry season. Finally, he ends his trip by going to the sea, taking one of the 9 estuaries, if you will, of the Mekong out to the sea from Mai Phao, and kind of actually dips his hand and tastes the salt water and tastes the Mekong slowly dissipating into it. With another family from a boat with another family that rented this sort of outlandish blue boat that he goes to the sea with. He kind of talks about some of the boat people that went from this region and tried to escape to either, like the Philippines or Thailand or Malaysia as refugees during the first few years of the reunified Vietnam. He talks about the education camps a little bit earlier in the chapter, but in general, you just get the sense that, the salt water being tasted in the ocean and the broad open ocean compared to the channel that is the Mekong, rising all the way from Tibet all the way down to the South China Sea. That's it. That's the end of the book. Okay, so this is a really, really long review, but this is a very good, very detailed book, so check it out. The River Tale, A Year on the Mekong by Edward Gargan. Alright, see you guys.